Heyo, welcome to another 100% review, and with the spooky season in full flight, what better time than to review Dead Space Remake, a game that at first glance really probably did not need a remake. The 2008 version still feels amazing to this very day. However, in the words of John Carpenter himself, this is a refurbishment, and a damn good one at that. A faithful recreation of the original with some tweaks here and there to better fit the story, environment or gameplay that may alter the experience a tad whilst keeping the main core intact. Probably the biggest change off the top of my head is Isaac having a voice and at times being a really chatty fella. But hey, that is what we're looking at today, so let's dive right in. First off the rank is performance and the technical state of the game. Now, I played this on a PS5, and the game a year and a half after the launch runs smoothly. I believe the game also runs reasonably well on Xbox and PC. I did encounter one game-breaking glitch, however, that forced me to restart my impossible difficulty run. In Chapter 3, you need to force restart the fuel lines to get the ship moving. There is a north and a south side switch that each need to be ignited. You can do these in any order. However, upon doing both, the quest log did not update for me, meaning the story itself could not be continued. I've seen various warnings and recommendations around how best to navigate avoiding this glitch. People suggest doing the south side first will avoid this occurring at all. Others suggest not saving during the segment and doing it in one continuous run. All I can say personally, and the way that I encountered it, is I did the south side first, however saved between doing south and north. This is because I was on impossible and things can kill you very quickly. Thankfully this only occurred once for me, and it really is only a headache if you choose to play on impossible mode wherein you only have one save file. Every other difficulty you'll be able to reload auto saves or just multiple saves that you have on hand. The actual game itself looks amazing though, with many of the rooms from the original having been tweaked slightly to pose some level of unfamiliarity even for the most veteran of unitologists. The lighting in Dead Space Remake is also fantastic, with a complete overhaul of the lighting engine, resulting in a game that is drenched in atmospheric horror. It reminds me very heavily of the first Alien movie. I will note that the original game was actually very well lit, and so when the lights went off, it was an incredibly tense feeling. Here that is lessened as the regular ship is already incredibly dark. They do compensate here by often blaring in an alarm. However, this rarely felt the same for me. And now let's talk about the story of Dead Space Remake. There will of course be spoilers, I'm covering the story here, so skip to the next section if you feel like avoiding these. At its basics, this is the story of Isaac Clarke, an engineer sent with a small crew to assist the USG Ishimura after a communication blackout with the planet cracker occurs. Isaac's own personal motive for accepting the job is that his partner Nicole is working on board as a science and medical officer. The USG Ishimura is a large planet cracker, a type of ship that goes to planets and extracts extremely large chunks of said planet to sift for resources. On this particular planet that it is orbiting, Aegis 7, a creepy space rock, has been unearthed, and from there, things get very deadly. Upon arriving at the Ishimura, Isaac and the crew find it in chaos, with necromorphs now roaming the halls, slaughtering and turning everyone that they find. Isaac is now separated from everyone else with two goals in mind: find Nicole and get off the ship. Possibly the largest change to the remake is the inclusion of the side quests, an expansion into Isaac Clarke's life and past association with unitology. Through these side quests and data log, we see glimpses at how Isaac's mother was involved in the church and how this greatly moulded his own opinion of them. We also see how this played a part in him meeting Nicole. I also love the use of the holotapes to flesh out this backstory without being intrusive. I liked that through these tapes we catch glimpses of Nicole's role within the ship and her co-workers, namely the antagonist Dr. Mercer. We also see little snippets of how the outbreak occurred and how things kind of devolved from there. Isaac having a voice and being very chatty does also affect the story beats. In the original game, he was a silent protagonist, being instructed on the tasks he needed to complete, versus here, where he often discusses an issue and uses his profession to find a solution. Hammond plays a lesser part in this, where in the original, he's the one that is often giving us the tasks that we need to do. However, here it makes more sense, as Isaac's the one that would know how things like the fuel lines work. This is both refreshing to the story of Dead Space 1, and aligns better with Dead Space 2 and 3, wherein Isaac did also speak. I will say that not all of the changes to the story and characters landed for me. The conflict between Hammond and Daniels, it does exist here, but it's a lot more toned down than the original. An example that comes to mind immediately is when we first crash land. In the original Dead Space, Daniels is very quick to pin the blame on Hammond, arguing that they should have instead jumped the ship away into space as opposed to trying to land. Whilst here the only real early conflict is Daniels questioning why Hammond needs to look into both her and Isaac's files prior to the mission itself. Hammond is easily one of the biggest changes in the remake, and probably the one I can say I enjoyed the least. In the original, he comes off as calculating and firm. Here, he does feel more human, but he also loses a considerable amount of that command. Like I said previously, in the original, he's often the one giving us the tasks, whereas here in the remake, Isaac himself is often the one identifying a solution to the problem that someone else points out. The complexity given to Hammond here is his relationship with fellow soldier Chen, a character killed off at the start of the game that becomes a reoccurring headache throughout the story. Some of the story beats executed with Chen and Hammond are okay, such as Chen being the necromorph in the escape pod that's later encountered in the game. However, quite a few of them are awful, with the conclusion of this subplot honestly being laughably executed. The stakes are raised essentially by Hammond saying one line about how they served together for many years. However, there's just not enough build-up to make any of this convincing. It's no Mac and Blaine from the first Predator, that's for sure. The conclusion of Hammond's subplot and life is changed significantly from the original, and is far worse. In the original, he's killed by a necro brute, whereas here he's killed by Chen. Now, being killed by Chen does make some sense in this aspect. Chen has been built up as a greater character. However, in the scenario, Hammond refuses to kill Chen. This is because he's heavily affected by the marker, only seeing human Chen and not the actual necromorph coming towards him. He does get his moment by pushing them both into the singularity core that we need as our objective. However, this kind of severely lessens his impact as a character for me. In the original, his death to the brute hyped me up. I looked forward to avenging him and took out that brute with glee. Here, you simply grab the core and leave. You move on to the next story beat just as fast as he dies. I do like expansion of the antagonists Mercer and Harris, however. Through holotapes mostly, we get an insight into Mercer's early workings, with Harris and manipulation into making him agree to become the Hunter, a mini-boss that Isaac encounters several times throughout the course of the story. I will say his death change was another thing I really did not like. In the original Dead Space, Isaac watches Mercer's death via recording. We see Mercer willingly submit to an infector while preaching out his beliefs. Here, he's instead killed by a tentacle that's not even really going for him, it's more just trying to get the marker out of the loading bay. Nicole is the final change I wish to discuss here. I've seen quite a few comments on Nicole's looks and how she's aged significantly. This never really bothered me. I believe the actress who plays Nicole is in her 40s, so it does make sense. Isaac himself is roughly 40 as well, so it does make some sense to me. What did bother me, however, is the subtlety being lost completely with the plot twist regarding Nicole. Again, major spoilers. From the maker's whole quotes, every other line, to Isaac taking his helmet to talk off to most of the other characters, they fell hard at the execution here. The newly added twist on the twist, again, did not work. The person we see as Nicole is actually Elizabeth Cross, a character that features in the mid-game chapter, however is not really seen again, outside of just data logs. She is seeing us as her partner Jacob, who is another minor character that we sort of see throughout, whose own personal story is actually pretty interesting and does mimic Isaac's to an extent. I did enjoy reading some of this through the data logs, but again, these two characters really weren't fleshed out enough to have this be an inclusion that really adds anything to Nicole's own plot twist, and certainly giving Nicole a physical entity was lackluster. It just did not work. The reason that it does not work to me is that we know that the marker makes people hallucinate loved ones. It does this well with Dr. Kyne, for example. I love little moments like him stopping to grab the arm of his deceased partner and walking out. We know that Dr. Kyne is seeing his dead wife Amelia, who passed away, I think it's 7 years prior to the events of the story. She doesn't exist, we can't physically see her, which means that this story beat from the original of Nicole being a ghost that we are seeing, or a vision that we are seeing, does work. I know that it does answer some of the questions from the original, like how is Nicole able to open doors, for example, for Isaac. However, it just lost a lot of the impact. Also, how did Cross navigate some of the later scenarios here completely unarmed, where most people would be slaughtered in 5 seconds? It made more sense with Nicole just simply not being there and being a vision that we can see and only we can see. But that's enough rambling on the plot twist, let's move on to progression and gameplay. As I stated earlier, the core of what made the original Dead Space so special remains here as well, just with some tweaks and changes. Some of these being fantastic, others being a case of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. One of the larger changes here is the combat. It's significantly faster than the original Dead Space. It feels far more like Dead Space 2, for example. Side note, EA, remake Dead Space 2 and 3, or port them to the current generation of consoles so I can do their trophy lists. Something I did notice that attributes to this speed is that your shots stagger the necromorphs far less. Everything still holds the same weighty feel while being fired and stomped, and Isaac's stomps still feel heavier. However, the necromorphs are certainly impacted far less by these shots. I do like the flesh system that is impacted here, wherein when you shoot necromorphs, not only do their limbs come off, but typically things like the flesh will come off before the bones, so if a limb takes 3 shots to take off, you're taking layers off to get it off. It's very gruesome, it's very visceral, and I did really enjoy that. Kinesis has also been tweaked to be far more like Dead Space 2 here. Unlike the original game, it can be fairly useful for killing off enemies fast, with the legs of carts or necromorph limbs themselves being a quick and easy way to land a kill, often by impaling an enemy to a wall. The downside of this is far more often than I would have liked, the game loved to give me a bucket or a chair as opposed to the spike that would help me kill something. Many near deaths and close calls were had on my impossible run as a result. The weapons have also had a bunch of overhauls, especially the alternate fire modes. The Force Gun now having a gravity well akin to Horizon's ultimate ability in Apex Legends immediately comes to mind. However, of course, my 2 main guns of choice outside of the weapon relevant achievements were the Plasma Cutter and the Finger Gun. The Plasma Cutter is the first gun you get in the game and is easily the best. You can switch the axis that it fires its 3 shots on to cater for every necromorph type. I use this exclusively on my Impossible run. The Finger Gun is a special unlock for beating the game on Impossible, and it can one-shot kill anything in the game, besides the bosses of course. This made my second playthrough of New Game Plus an absolute walk in the park. The combat itself works really well, necromorphs are lean, mean killing machines, and come in several shapes and sizes. You have the standard necromorph that sprints at you and attacks up close and personal. You have the baby necro that crawls around on the floor and walls firing at a distance. The bomb guys that explode up close, etc, etc. There is fantastic variety here, and while the tried and true method of killing them by removing their limbs is going to carry you far, some of these variants do need to be adapted to, such as the baby necro needing its tentacles to be shot, versus the bomb arm being a one-shot kill on the bomber guys. Progression in this game comes in the form of weapon and suit upgrades. Each weapon has a tree of stat boosts that can be invested in via power nodes. These nodes can then either be bought at the store or found in wall cabinets around the ship. The occasional power node is also dropped by a rare mini-boss enemy type called the Necromorph Brute. One thing I do really like is the power suit progression. Not only does this enhance your stats such as health and oxygen, but it also visually changes the look of the suit itself. Level 1 resembles the suit of a space engineer looking to fix some circuits, whilst level 5 is an armoured tank of an Isaac. I also really like how ammo and currency is handled. The loot dropped by enemies is typically exclusively to the gun that is directly in your inventory. Only carry a plasma cutter and you'll only be dropped plasma rounds. You can then sell your ammo at the store. An enemy will typically give you the same amount or a similar volume of ammo to that was used to kill it, should you not miss your shots. For example, if a necromorph, just a regular standard one, takes 6 shots to kill, then you'll be able to loot 6 shots back off it. If it took 7 shots to kill it because you missed one of those shots, then you're down a bullet by default. So the store then becomes a gamble of sorts. Do you sell 2 of your 3 stacks of ammo for a health kit because you're at half health? Or do you just back yourself to land your shots a bit better? I love resource management in games, so this is of course a welcome addition to me. I will say the secret ending that is accessible only in New Game Plus and collecting the markers is a very nice touch as well. So difficulty is next, and this comes with several options. Easy, normal, and hard are essentially just modifiers to the amount of damage enemies take and receive. Impossible is the only one that mixes things up here. It's essentially hard mode, but with one save file. If you die, that's it. Enemies will kill you in roughly 3 or 4 hits on impossible or hard. You can somewhat mitigate this by utilizing cloud saves to back up your saves. But that's it really. There's not much more to say here. Easy will have you tearing through enemies, whilst hard requires a lot more caution. The trophy/achievement list for Dead Space is a good one in my opinion. I do wish it held some more miscellaneous trophies and missed tasks to conduct, but what is here is largely fair and not too grindy. Nothing feels like padding for the sake of padding. The list itself has 48 trophies including the platinum. 12 of the trophies are tied directly to simply completing each chapter of the game, regardless of the difficulty that you're on. A couple more are then tied to completing the game on the various trophies, with the hardest trophy being for completing impossible difficulty. Possibly the most grindy trophy is the one for fully upgrading every weapon and the suit. Whilst you can use infinite money exploits to buy the power nodes necessary, such as the ones with the plasma gun, or I believe there's one with the stasis guys you can use, I personally just earned this naturally via playing through the game twice and selling any items or ammo I didn't need. A feat you'll need to do for the New Game Plus trophy and secret ending trophy regardless. The rest of the trophies are things like getting 30 kills with every weapon, finding lore data tags, beating bosses and playing basketball. My personal route to 100% completion was simple. Playthrough 1 was on impossible mode, only using the plasma cutter. Impossible mode and only using the plasma cutter being the specific trophies I focused on. The plasma cutter itself is the best weapon in the game anyway, and the ammo sells for a decent amount too, so I'd be able to buy power nodes as need be to work on the upgrading all weapon trophy as well. This made the most sense to me. Whilst doing this run, I also looked for the data logs. You need maybe about 70% of the data logs in the game for the trophies, but this also gave me some insight to then also use for this review. Playthrough 2 was cleanup, use the other weapons, get 30 kills with each of those before switching to the finger gun and one-shotting everything. Focus on weapons upgrades, obviously about half of them I still needed to fully upgrade to earn the trophy, and most importantly, find the market collectibles exclusive to New Game Plus. These are tied directly to the secret ending and must all be found and delivered to the captain's quarters before you can unlock this ending. Playthrough 1 took roughly 13 hours, whilst playthrough 2 took exactly 6 hours. I think I did it in 5 hours and 58 minutes. I would give the difficulty of this 100% completion a 4 out of 10. There's nothing really here that stands out as terribly hard. Impossible mode is definitely the hardest hurdle to overcome, I would say. That one save file can be nasty at times, such as when I encountered the glitch in chapter 3 that forced me to fully restart the game. However, the fact that you can back up to the cloud definitely does help, and a lot of it is more just how you yourself will overcome things like jump scares and atmospheric horror. The actual combat itself is not necessarily too difficult, it's more the physical horror surrounding it that can play an effect. And that is the Dead Space Remake, a game that takes something that worked previously, gives it some polish and tweaks, and dishes out a fancy new lighting system. I enjoyed my time with this again. I do remember this and the remake of Resident Evil 4 releasing at roughly the same time, and this was my preferred version of the two remakes. I do look forward to eventually going back and analysing that one as well though. A game that often takes 2 steps forward and 1 step back in the story department, whilst often excelling in the atmosphere and gameplay. This is indeed the perfect game to complete for your Halloween season.